Yes, you've got brands talking. Brandlive.co.za.
And is it just 30 minutes?
Hello and welcome to Creative Ghettos, the show that explores various creative industries and profiles the Africans who push them forward. Each week, I spend 30 minutes unveiling excellent and inspiring individuals within creative industries, including, but not limited to, fine art, architecture, design, food, film, and literature. My name is Kwanele Kunene. Thank you for joining me right here on brandlive.co.za. My guest today is Ntombenhle Shezi, who's the assistant editor at ELLE Magazine and ELLE Décoration South Africa. Her role in journalism and publishing has seen her tap into forward-looking and broad ideas across Africa as well as the rest of the world, interviewing the likes of Mante Rebane of De Rebane, as well as Carol Lim and Umberto Leon of Japanese fashion house Kenzo. So it was beyond fitting that a person with such a multifaceted exposure to the world tell their story and share their views on the life of creatives in Africa. Ntombenhle, welcome to Creative Ghettos.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Yes, I'm truly so excited to have you for a multitude of reasons. But I want to get into knowing your journey a little more. When did you know for sure that journalism was for you?
So I think, I always talk about my obsession with magazines. So I've always loved, I'd always find myself in pages of magazines just growing up. It would be like your tribute magazines, from the drums to the, international titles like Vanity Fair. I grew up in Soweto, partially in Soweto, and there was a library in now Ichabavu. It's now called the Rosa Parks Library, and I'd go there every month and get like backhand copies of the international titles.
Oh, wow.
And so I would sit and read and etc. So in my head, I didn't necessarily think, okay, this is where I'm going to go. I didn't necessarily think I'd land up working for a magazine, but I definitely knew that this is what I loved. And just, feeling the pages of the magazines, just, the curiosity of like who wrote this article, who's the photographer, who's on the masthead. So that kind of stuff filled my imagination like my entire childhood. And then I went to school. And I was never really sure about what I wanted to do, but
that's always a struggle, isn't it?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily want to be like a lawyer, or, there was like a lot of, stuff just kind of like in my head around perhaps like creativity. So I ended up going to Wits, and I majored in history and African literature. And I think at that point, the future was not necessarily clear. It wasn't like, okay, now I'm doing this, it means the next step will be this. I was just extremely passionate about African writers, and then it then became like African sort of like people have contributed to literature, but not just like writing. It would be filmmakers.
And who were these people at the time for you?
I mean, Mariam Ba, I love that. And, her. And also just kind of, the sort of my first sort of like entry point was your Chinua Achebe, but later on you're reading Adichie and your Von Vera, there was like, but I think for me, the biggest thing outside of just the books was being in a department where all the lecturers were Black. And it was also very intimate. So it wasn't like, the earlier years were quite full, but later on it was just very intimate, and I think I just loved being in a completely Black space and engaging with Black content, literature, and etc. And I think that would also go and influence sort of like my kind of broader kind of interest in creativity and Black people producing different types of texts, whether it is a book or film, and different types of content. And then so that was school. And then
what was that? Did it create like an awareness that whatever it is that you want to do, it is possible for you to do it, and as a Black person, what was it that it inspired in you?
I think what it did to me was, we are so dope as Black people, because we're so freaking dope.
Yeah.
And because you go to high school and you learn specific things, and you're reading specific books and a specific type of history. I mean, when I was in university, I did a lot of African focused kind of history, like, stuff based in the continent, etc. And I was first of all like, oh my God, like I can't believe I haven't come across these people or this information my entire life. So it takes me how many years to get to this point where I'm like, and obviously because of the world we live in, where as Black people, the kind of structures that have been built to make us not know how amazing we are, or not being able to tap into our history. And I think when I got into that space, it was just like, oh my God, like, and so I think those sensibilities were there. And I think still not knowing, per se what I wanted to do, I did enjoy it to write.
Yeah.
And then I was just kind of like, okay, I guess this means I want to be a journalist, And so
I guess so.
I guess, what else do you kind of do? I'm not really a great, I didn't see myself as being someone who like wrote novels or whatever, but I became very interested in that. And then I was, trying to get my honors, but I couldn't really afford to be at school at that time. So I, like most people, ended up dropping out. And I started doing work for a publication called Live Magazine. And Live Magazine was a British publication, and then it for like young kind of people, and it came to South Africa. And now it's just, Live Magazine is still there, but it's a digital platform, and it's under Liberty Africa. Okay. And that was the first time where the idea of, the sensibilities of loving to write or create content and just being interested in what Black people are doing and what we're about, I was able to just kind of like merge it in a sense. So we were creating content. We created actually, when we were still printing, there was a publication, we printed Live Magazine. So it was a group of us, really brilliant young people who are still doing some really brilliant things right now. I mean, you have who's like a photographer. She's amazing. We were in the same group, and Fela Kuchi's part of Faga.
Yeah.
So we were just like creating this little magazine. Then we would go and physically distribute it in kind of like the streets. And I was like, okay, this is really, I love this. Like, I'm really, really feeling this. But still not knowing how to take it forth, because anyone who works in journalism or publishing knows that it's very closed off. And so you're not necessarily able to just kind of like walk in and, make things happen. Ended up working for the British Council for a bit in between those years. There was a creative program there which was really dope, so I did work for them. And then that's when I started freelancing. Did some freelancing work for, and that was maybe 5-6 years ago, for like Mail and Guardian, City Press, and then a friend, Panashe Chugumadzi, started Vanguard, so I was writing for Vanguard. Then Marie Claire did some, but I think it was because I kind of met people who I would like kind of talk to, and they would like give me kind of opportunities to either write for them, or they knew someone knew someone, they would introduce me to someone. And so I was freelancing for a bit. And then a few years ago, I then was able to get the opportunity to work at ELLE Magazine. So for me, ELLE was also one of those publications I did remember from my kind of like childhood, and I knew the brand because I grew up I remember the covers. I remember one cover, I remember in like 2003, I think it had Alicia Keys on the cover, and it was just like, I remember the article, I remember who interviewed her, what it looked like, what it felt like to have it.
Yeah.
So I was very aware of the brand, and I guess it might have been like some kind of manifestation from like then that, that kind of got me into the space. And I started off as not even writing, but like a fashion assistant at ELLE Magazine. And remember having moments where I'm like, okay, why am I here? Because I just really want to write. Okay. But the entryway to being able to write, I ended up also then being features assistant, having to do the fashion stuff. So I worked a lot in the fashion department of ELLE Magazine, and that meant doing stuff like, helping fashion ed to prepare for shoots, writing content that was very fashion focused as well, just sort of like sourcing clothes, literally putting shoots together, and then so that happened, but also then started writing a lot. So I did a lot of features for ELLE Magazine. I was there for about, I think, two years. And I think I was a bit younger and braver then, because I read the stuff I wrote then. I was like, oh, this is a little bit embarrassing.
Why? Why? What was the subject matter like in your mind at the time?
I think, I was just kind of like, when you're kind of like young and you just like, you can do anything, and kind of there's like I think a bravery when you're young, where I think maybe you might be less judgmental of the work you're doing. You're just doing it. I mean, I was reading an article recently. I was cringing, but I think I appreciate that space, and I still appreciated that space. So, and there were lots of amazing opportunities that came from, even working in the space that was very fashion focused, even though in my head I was just like, I just really want to write, getting to travel to really some cool places and to interview, like you mentioned, the Kenzo opportunity, etc. And then, I ended up working for the Sunday Times, and moved to the Sunday Times, but they had am I talking a lot?
No.
Okay.
You are speaking your story. It is filled with information and we want to know. No, go on, please.
Okay, ended up at Times Media, and they had something called the Design Hub, which would then be like all of Times Media's kind of like lifestyle and fashion publications. And lots of media houses are doing this, where people are working across publications, with the industry shrinking, etc. So worked on the Sunday Times, worked on the lifestyle pages, worked in the fashion department, and then a Business Day has a publication called Wanted. So I was writing for Wanted as well, and Sowetan launched S-Mag, and I was writing for S-Mag as well. And then in that space, there was just kind of like an opportunity or just a need for a beauty writer. So I also took up beauty writing as well.
Yes.
And at the same time, I was still writing the stories that really moved me, stories about like filmmakers and musicians and playwrights. I was writing that for like the Sunday Times, so the lifestyle section. Had amazing opportunity to interview amazing people, but having to I was always just willing to just do a lot of stuff. And then hoping one day it will make sense. So, I mean, when I was doing the beauty writing, for me, it was interesting because the beauty industry is quite an interesting one, where it needs to become more diverse, not just, like in this country, but internationally. So you're kind of thinking a lot about like, why am I doing this, and how can I kind of make a kind of an honest contribution to the work,
Which is something that I actually wanted to ask you, that, when you decided to follow journalism, and actually even because, we choose to get into the spaces that we're in, to be in magazines, what were some of the things you passionately felt that you wanted and maybe still want to contribute to within the space?
Well, I think kind of looking then, for me the most obvious things was just like not seeing people who look like me on the covers, especially not seeing in women's magazines, just like growing up, and every once in a while you'd have like Elle Quick, or another once in a while you'd have like someone else, a Naomi Campbell, and especially there weren't necessarily a lot of like local women who looked like me who were on the covers. And so I think my kind of contribution, and not just my contribution, but the team I work with at ELLE, I think we're all very much aware about being intentional with the work, about where we are on the continent, where we are in the world, and why it's important to not just have specific people on the cover or specific people in the magazine, but who's producing that content. So who's writing, who's the photographer, and just making the effort to be really intentional with that kind of, I think, when we talk about transformation is like this thing people talk about, and it's like, okay, then you get a few people who look black or who are black, but it's like it needs like real effort and real work to make sure that once you have those people in the space, what happens next, and I think that's definitely important to me and has always been important to me.
Okay, so what does it mean then to hold dual editorship for one of the most influential media publications in the world? What are your responsibilities like, and some of the spaces that you frequent, and when do you sleep?
So I think, the ELLE and ELLE Decoration opportunity was also one that came by total surprise. I don't know, I think, sorry. So it came by total surprise when Kanye Lomo bought the license to ELLE and ELLE Decoration. She called me in to kind of interview for the position of working on ELLE Decoration. I wasn't necessarily sure what it would be, but it was this idea of making it more accessible to also just young people, and just a reflection of what is happening in our country, whether it's from a design perspective or from an interiors perspective or art perspective. Yeah. So I only really got onto ELLE as assistant editor at the end of last year. So that was when it became the dual editorship. So what it means to me is that I don't know. I don't necessarily kind of understand what it means yet. I don't see it as like this big thing perhaps yet. Yeah. And I think it's because you're just always stuck in the work. You're always just working on the next thing and doing the next thing and looking for the next story and curating the magazine from start to end and thinking about admin things, etc. But don't take being here for granted, just because I think about all the Black women who've already been doing, I think, what I've been doing historically in the space. But living in the digital age means more people are visible. So you might see me right now as assistant editor of these publications, but I definitely know a long list of Black women who have, for me, already been in this space, in this imagination of like trying to shift the conversations in magazines.
Who are they? Can we please just name them so that we all know?
There are so many, my heroes, So Matahle Stofile, who was... she's the beauty editor and then became beauty director of Marie Claire, and I followed her career from day one. Yeah. Love what she's doing with the Mad Project, and
she's got a podcast as well.
She does, she's amazing, and I feel so inspired by her. Always was inspired by her, and I got to work with her for a bit. And one thing she taught me was to be totally unapologetic about your project, about what you're doing, about what you stand for, and I can really appreciate that. Kanye Lomo, who I think quite lucky to call her my boss, amazing visionary woman. There's Sheena Adams, who's like now editor of Destiny. I remember following her career from when she was in newspapers. Kimong Mubedi was my first mentor when I started Live Magazine, and she is associated editor at Destiny. So I'm lucky to kind of be in a similar space. You have Zanele Khumalo, who, I mean, I think she's like my hero, and Zotto Khumalo, and there's Mbali Soga. There's so many, Kwezi Makwaza, Janine Jelas, there's so many Black women. And I think as someone who has read magazines and has watched the mastheads, they've always been there. And I think they have I feel like I'm able to do the things that I can do so bravely because they've already done the work. So when I'm kind of like, okay, let's do this for the cover, let's do this kind of story, I kind of know that there are people who've been trying these things already.
Do you know what I appreciate? I appreciate the fact that you've never overlooked these women, because let me not say some people, me. The one thing that I've done is, I'll recognize the names, or I'll recognize the people, but and that they are working within these spaces, but I never give them the credit that they deserve as people who are actually actively changing some sort of conversation within the country and in Africa at large, and I love the fact that you acknowledge them.
I think, I definitely think like it's, that for me, and I'm lucky to kind of be able to, call some of them mentors, or not. Some of them I just don't even know, but I think they've always been there, and so it's not like a first time thing that I think me occupying this kind of space, etc. I've seen it before, but I definitely kind of think, social media and digital space allows you to be more aware of things than we were back then. So
thank God for the internet.
Exactly. So quite there's a lot of gratitude kind of there. So that's, the other thing I think about the space is being able to put forth ideas that perhaps years ago I would have been too afraid to do. And I think now people will kind of give it a chance, or kind of listen, or let you do your thing. When we did that cover with like Mante, Rara and Nonku, it was really great also just to work with a team who's also very like young, and we just kind of like trying things out, and we'll just see how this works after,
Okay, we're going to take a really short break. I'll have more with Ntombenhle Shezi after this.
Have you ever thought about the power of social media? Social media has the power to make your business grow. Yeah. Why don't you let us manage your social media? Because our business is to see your business grow. Visit us at www.bstownmedia.co.za.
You're listening to brandlive.co.za, an industry first in the world of internet radio. Not only are we an internet radio station, we are an internet radio platform for your brand. So why not expose your brand to potentially thousands of listeners and improve your customer relationships and brand equity with podcasts and live broadcasts? Be sure to check brandlive.co.za for more information. brandlive.co.za, harnessing the power of internet radio. You're listening to brandlive.co.za.
Welcome back to Creative Ghettos. I am joined by Ntombenhle Shezi, who's the assistant editor for ELLE magazine and ELLE Decoration South Africa. Before the break, we spoke extensively about her rise within the publication and journalism industries. And now I really want to get into, to some of the things that she's been exposed to and just her thoughts about creative industries at large, especially in Africa. Ntombenhle, industries like interior design, architecture, and arts, they seem to only really get attention from people within the industry. How do you think that we can bridge, build a bridge linking these industries with the general public so that they don't seem as elitist or unattainable?
Yeah. Well, to be quite honest, a lot of these spaces are elitist. They really are. And I think it's definitely structural issues because you start from, who's actually, going to the specific universities to get these degrees. So what does that look like? What does it look like to sit in a design or architectural class and from that kind of, and then also like historically, and it's like with any kind of industry, if you kind of have people who've been doing something the same way with the same people, they kind of continue doing that for a very long time. So I think the whole kind of thing is that these people are there. Definitely, we have amazing and brilliant I think about, the Ngumalo siblings, Donald and Knox Ngumalo. They're brilliant interior designers, architects like, Semai Valley. So we're there, furniture makers like Mpo Veika, who's behind the Urban Native. And I think, it's really like it takes a lot of work from people who already have the access and who already have the resources to kind of either kind of like bring people into the spaces or of course, we have a lot of people creating their own spaces, etc. So it's not just about working for Deco magazine and seeing someone featured. You have a lot of people doing their own work outside of those, so maybe from the margins or like outside of that kind of stuff. And social media has like really, really helped. So you can follow people and you can see kind of stuff. I think we can talk about like bridging the gap and connecting industries, but I think there's definitely something to be said about disrupting the way things are being done. So why must...
How would you?
So I think in terms of you have people who are already doing it. Why, like especially in terms of the creative space. I mean, obviously, you do have to go to school and be in specific institutions for certain things to kind of happen. But you have people who are not waiting for an art gallery to sign them to show a work or whatever. People are doing that their own self. People who are distributing, their own work, etc. And support is quite important. But I don't think support is not there because. I think people, even like in terms of the work that I do, I don't think the support is not there, but I do think it's a real thing. Economics are a real thing.
Yeah.
So sometimes people really love the work that we do or the work that like some of my friends who are artists do, but you can't afford it.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not supporting it. So I think the work is already being done and the people are already necessarily being there, but I think perhaps we need to kind of stop looking for kind of a stamp of approval from bigger institutions and for it to be a thing, for it to feel like, but of course all that stuff does...
To give it credibility.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff does kind of like work, as well, because obviously when you show somewhere or when you build something or you're on, then you're probably going to get more people interested in the work. They'll probably invest or buy it, and artists and designers need that. But I think, it's just about knowing that we don't need to validate something as successful because it's reached a specific pinnacle, a platform, etc. Yeah.
How would you say centres like the Keys Art Mile in Rosebank and the recently opened 99 Juta and Braam help with encouraging people to get their own spaces professionally designed and decorated?
So I think those spaces are quite important. What I really appreciate perhaps about those spaces is because people can just kind of like come in and walk in and see things and perhaps talk to the kind of designers who are showing, etc. But I also do think, and not just those kind of spaces, but I'm like geographically, even when we think about those spaces, but like other spaces like galleries, museums and fairs, they're not accessible geographically, you know? So as much as perhaps it could be free to go into a specific space, how am I getting from point A to point B to go into that kind of space? So I think, I think for me, when I think about accessibility, it's like, even if it's free entrance, so I can just walk in, it's like, I can't really access that space because of where you are. So I think it would be interesting to see where those kind of spaces and other museums in the future look at opening spots, you know, would you do something, I don't know, in the hood or etc. And why not? Why, you know, but obviously, I guess, you know, when we look at the kind of people who are in those spaces, galleries, etc., those spaces work for them. And the spaces kind of work for their kind of audience. But I think to kind of make things, you know, a little bit, open up the conversation and allow people into kind of spaces, we need to think about like where we are and who can honestly make a contribution as an audience member, who can honestly be in conversation with us if we're not accessible, you know?
From the point of fashion, there have been conversations about a specific super influential fashion magazine having an African extension. Do you think that that particular publication is ready to tell Africa's stories in relevant and transformative ways? Or do you think they would make the continent's creative contributions insignificant undertones to the global narrative?
I'm interested to kind of see, because with everything sort of like going kind of digital, if there is really space to just be, you know, kind of like still printing in terms of just like a physical copy of the, you know, especially international magazines coming to the market. So with a publication that I'm working for, etc., that stuff has already been there sort of like historically. So people have a base already.
We've engaged already from that
kind of stuff. So no one can tell our stories better than, you know, we can. And I think there are already platforms online like the Bubblegum Club who are doing that just perfectly, you know. And I mean, it's, for me, the biggest thing is that if more publications come in, are you going to create jobs for more creatives? So are the writers going to be from the continent, or the photographers going to be the designers you'll be profiling? So it'd be interesting for me from like a job creation perspective. But and I definitely think in terms of like the future of publishing is very shaky. So what are people doing online that's interesting and, you know, worthwhile? Because people on the continent, we're already doing that stuff, you know. People are already creating online platforms that are, you know, shining a spotlight on fashion on the continent, arts on the continent, etc.
And in high levels, you know.
Exactly. So it would be interesting to kind of see if there's space kind of for that. And if there's space for that, great. You're creating jobs that are on the continent, because sometimes, you know, that stuff might be, you know, it might be called like Africa something, but perhaps the people producing the content are not here. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. And just lastly, very quickly, what's next for you?
What's next for me? Wow. I think, you know, we'll be in publishing for a little bit more. But as I said, times are changing, and I'm interested to kind of see where the idea of magazine publishing is just going to go. I'm definitely looking at the online space as a point of interest, like, you know, we all should be. But at the moment, I'm still going to be on ELLE and ELLE Decoration, just kind of looking at continuing to do the work of profiling amazing, dope creatives who are on the continent and in the diaspora.
And thank you for the March issue. That was absolutely incredible. That changed my way of looking at media in such a huge way.
We hope to actually continue doing more issues like that kind of change the way we think what can be done, or the way we see traditional magazines. And thank you to everyone who showed love for that, because there was a lot of kind of love for that issue. And I think the people on the cover were amazing themselves. Mante, Rara and Nonku are amazing. And also very grateful to work with a great team. And hopefully we can continue to do stuff like that and more.
Cool. Ntombenhle, we've reached the end of our conversation. Thank you for stepping through to Creative Ghettos today and offering a piece of who you are and your views about creative industries in Africa. You can follow Ntombenhle on Instagram at Ntombenhle Shezi. Otherwise, just grab a copy of ELLE and ELLE Décor South Africa. To find out more about the Africans who drive various creative industries forward, make sure to follow Creative Ghettos on Instagram at Creative Ghettos. My name is Kwanele Kunene. Join me again next Friday from 2 to 2:30 p.m. for another impactful show. Bye for now.
You're listening to brandlive.co.za.